Hey, happy Friday. We're glad you're with us. Thank you for joining us for GC 365. It is day 113, and I am here with my good friend Dutch. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Now, we had an interesting reading, I think, today in that we're starting Judges, and we're in the first chapter of Judges, and Joshua has just died. And the idea now is that it's now time to go in and take over the land that God has promised us. You know, here the children of Israel have been promised this land, so now it's time to go in and take it. Caleb has now kind of stepped into the leadership role. And I thought one thing that was kind of interesting to me is that they begin to go in and conquer the land. Yep. So there's a lot of bad guys in there, but they've got to go conquer the land. And what is interesting to me is this: they take this one king down. Let's see, what is his name? It's Adonai.
It's an interesting
Bezek.
Bezek?
Adonai Bezek.
Yep.
We're not going to say a lot of the names because it would be really complicated.
They get tongue-tied all the time.
Right. They capture this guy and they cut off his thumbs and his big toes.
Big toes, yeah.
Big toes. And then what I think is funny is that he said, after they've done this to him, he said, well, I've had 70 kings in my possession and I've cut off their thumbs and toes as well and made them eat
and they're
crumbs
eating crumbs off of
under the table.
Under the table. Yeah.
So it's just bizarre that this is kind of the way they treated kings that they conquered like this. But I don't know the significance. Do you know of any significance, thumbs and toes?
Well, no, I don't. But I do know that kind of one thing that popped up for me in reading that was that, you know, you don't want to be boasting that you've cut off toes and thumbs for 70 kings.
Yeah.
Because what happens to them next?
That's right. But I wonder if you saw somebody with no thumbs, would you say, are you a king?
Right?
Were you a king, maybe?
Yeah, or can't really walk because no big toes.
Yeah. So anyway, the story goes on, and all of the different tribes have to go into their part of the land and conquer the land. And there's one story of them going into Jerusalem, actually. And I've got to go to Jerusalem, got to stay there for a couple of times. And just to imagine them coming into Jerusalem to conquer the people there. But one thing I find interesting is that they didn't finish the job. They didn't get rid of the whole group that were there that they were supposed to. And there's implications to that, I think.
Yep. Because the people in the valley there.
Am I pulling on your cord?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Stop yanking on my cord there.
So then there's a part in, actually it talks about the different places. Some of them conquered the entire land, but then there are other areas that they didn't finish the job. They let the people who were living there stay there. And then it goes into Judges 2, jumps right ahead to Judges 2. And the angel comes to them and said, when I told you to take the land, I told you to annihilate everybody in there, which you didn't do. And now you're going to suffer the consequences of not finishing the job. What do you think those consequences are for them?
Well, you know, I don't remember.
Well, as I recall, it's the reason they want them to conquer the land is because these were pagan people that had pagan beliefs. They had pagan temples. They were, worshiping idols. They were sacrificing children. And so the angel of God said, go in and wipe them out because I don't want your future generations to be influenced by these negative people. And so
they become thorn in their sides.
They become a thorn in their sides. And it's just, it's an interesting thing. And so now I'm going to digress a little bit back into our other readings previous to this. And this just occurred to me. As you begin to read through Exodus and then Leviticus, and you begin to see all these rules, one thing that kept jumping out to me is, and you get this idea almost that they keep talking about unleavened bread. When you sacrifice to God, use unleavened bread. And you get this idea that God hates leaven. He hates yeast almost. But I'm wondering now if this is not a lesson that, because they talk about this idea that a little bit of yeast will leaven the whole bunch. So the question I have is, was this a warning to him? If you don't get rid of it all, It's
Right.
going to slowly begin to leaven the whole, or,
Right.
infiltrate the entire community. And so were those warnings all along that you need to finish this. It needs to be no yeast in this at all. I don't know if that's the case, but
Yeah.
that's something that jumped out to me.
That's a pretty good corollary. You would think that has something to do with it.
Right. Yep. Then we, in our New Testament, we went to Luke, and we're Luke 21 and 22. And if I were to encapsulate this whole idea, it's this idea of be ready.
Mhm.
Be ready for the return of Jesus. And it kind of starts off by Jesus saying, notice the fig tree. Whenever you see the leaves begin to come out, you know that summer's
Something's
coming.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's this idea that you need to look for the signs for the return of Christ.
Right.
And he says, don't let your heart be dulled. That was another thing. Don't let your heart become hardened to what's going on around you. Stay sensitive to what God's doing.
Yeah, because he gives that warning, watch out. Don't let your hearts be dull.
Right. And then it goes into the story of it's Passover time. It's right before he's betrayed. It's Passover time. And something that really struck me this time is it says that Satan entered Judas. So I know that he's been contemplating this of betraying Jesus, but there's a moment when Satan entered Judas, and it's like a done deal then. He's going to betray Jesus. And then another thing I find interesting is that Jesus said to Peter and John, go find a place for a Passover. He said, go into the city, go into Jerusalem, and follow the guy that's carrying a pitcher of water. So see a guy, pitcher of water, follow him to his place. And when he goes in, say, hey, the master said that we can use your upper room. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. You guys can come here and have the Passover meal. And there's a couple of times, like when you go find the donkey tied to the thing and tell him the master needs the donkey. So there's a few of those kinds of times where he does that. I can remember, again, being in Jerusalem and going into that upper room and just imagining that this is the place, man. This is the area that Jesus would have met with his disciples on that Last Supper, which is kind of a cool thing.
That'd be pretty cool to do. I've not been to Jerusalem, but I'd look forward to doing that someday, just for that, give you that different perspective.
There is a trip coming up in 2022, and those of you that are interested in going, it will change your life. And so if you can go, it really will, because these scriptures come alive when you actually stand in those places.
When you're literally there in the place of history where these things happen, it
is powerful. Yeah, it really
I can
is
imagine.
Powerful. And you really sense the presence of God in a lot of those places.
Yeah.
Some of the places are so commercialized, it's like, I don't know. But some of those places are just sacred, I believe. The Psalms.
Can I step back when you were talking in Luke 21 a little bit, when you were talking about being ready, and it's talking about drunkenness and don't be carousing, doing all that stuff, because then you won't be ready. For me, it's kind of like regular life. Sometimes our life gets so busy, we allow ourselves to get so busy, we miss these things.
Yeah.
And so it's basically, to me, I took it as saying, don't be so busy in life that you can't stop and see when I'm coming, what's going on, what's happening in life. Be alert. Don't just be so lost in your busyness of life.
Right. Very good. The Psalms today is actually 90 and 91, Psalms 90 and 91. And I don't know about you, but the beginning of it is not real encouraging to me. And again, I always say that the Psalms are like, one of them's really down in the dumps and the next one is a little more uplifting, and it's kind of back and forth. But then I think of myself, I mean, that's kind of life. Sometimes life is great and sometimes life is tough. And so
kind of showing both sides of the coin.
Yeah,
you see the heads, you see the tails.
And it would seem that David is just being real. He's just being, just really open about what's going on in his life. Verse 10 kind of jumped out at me, and it says, 70 years are given us. And some of you, maybe even you're going to live to 80. But then it goes on and it says, but even the best years are filled with pain and trouble.
Yep.
So again, that's a very good description of just life in general.
You're going to have some great years, and there's going to be some years that not so much.
Right.
Those years you just soon forget.
But then in chapter 91, it kind of changes over. And in verse 1, and this is one of my favorite verses, where it says, "Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. He alone is my shelter. And then as you read on, it says he'll cover us with his feathers." So it's almost the idea of the little chicks, and he gathers them under himself and shelters us. And I love that picture that's painted for us there. He's like a mother hen almost to us.
So even though you're going to have those times where it's rough, that flip side of the coin, there's going to be those times where Jesus is just going to draw you near.
That's right. Yeah. Anything else jump out there in the Psalms to you?
Well, it just talks about not dreading. Sometimes we get so caught up in the difficulties of life. I've had a few struggles recently, and it's just the whole idea of God encouraging us that,
right.
Even though there's going to be difficult days, hang in there. I'm here. I love you. And, it's just, even though there's some dread and there's some tough times, times will change, and I'll bring you in and I'll hold you near.
God is God in the good and in the bad times.
Amen.
God is the same. Yeah, that's really good. And then this is, I'm kind of interested to talk about this next, the Proverbs. And we're in Proverbs 13 right now, and it's verses 24 and 25. But I want to hear your opinion of this.
I had to show this to my kids.
Did you? Okay. So it says in verse 24, "Those who spare the rod of discipline hate their children, and those who love their children care enough to discipline them."
I'm like, see, guys, I love you enough. I don't hate you. I'm not sparing that rod, so I don't hate you. I just want you to know that.
So it's funny. I think back so I've had a bit of an Abraham moment in my life. So I had kids when I was very young, then they grew up, and then I've had kids now in my older age. And when the kids when I was young and my kids grew up, I didn't spare the rod. Okay, I used the rod. And I'll never forget when my wife, when we were pregnant, the second batch of kids, my wife said to me, "We're not going to spank our kids, are we?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? Of course we are.
Can't spare the rod.
We're not going to spare the rod." And she's like, "Oh, I don't know if that's the way that we do things now. You don't punish someone with spanking when, it's almost the idea of don't hit your brother or I'm going to hit you. It's like you pay a penalty with a penalty like that. I don't know. It's kind of a disconnect. Now, I will say that my younger kids have experienced the rod, but maybe not like I used it before, that we've tried the approach of more reason and communication, but there are a lot of people today that think that the rod should not be used.
Yeah, and I think it's, kind of like it says, those who love their children care enough to discipline them. I think there's something to be said for, just like us, when we stray, God has a way of bringing us back into the fold, and he has a way of allowing our consequences to be felt, because if you don't feel those consequences, you don't feel the love of God, you don't feel that discipline.
Right.
There's that disconnect there. So
now, yesterday I was in a conversation with Pastor Dan, and Pastor Dan said to me, and I think this is funny, but Pastor Dan said, "Did you get spanked a lot in school?" And I was like, "No."
School?
But Dan experienced that numerous times.
Yeah.
Even in the classroom, he told the story of a teacher spanking him because, in a sermon some time ago, he talked about getting an F on a paper. Well, he got a spanking for that. He didn't finish that,
wow.
But right in class, he gets a spanking. And I cannot imagine that today. I mean,
yeah, I don't think that would fly in today's society, but
No.
I'm a little older maybe than you, and I had to have my hand on the desk a time or two because the teachers would, instead of a spank, you would get the ruler across your fingers.
Yeah.
So Not very often, because I was such a good kid, of course. I was almost perfect, really. But it might have been a time or two that I had that ruler across my finger.
Now, Dutch, I have to tell you something. I had to look something up before we met today. I am older than you. Yeah, I am. Okay. Only 2 months, but I'm 2 or 3 months, but I'm older. So anyway, the last part of that scripture says, the godly eat to their heart's content, but the belly of the wicked goes hungry.
There's that consequence.
Yeah. I don't want to be wicked.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to eat well. Yep.
Absolutely.
Well, you know what? That's kind of our reading for the day. We're glad you've joined us again. Hope you'll continue to join us every day for our GC 360. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us, guys.